Hi everyone, welcome to another episode on Learn All Things Cyber with T. Today we will be talking about risk management. I don't have enterprise experience with risk management, but I'll try my best, to explain the topic as simple as possible. And this is because I've gotten a couple of questions this week, at least from two people, to explain the process of risk management, third-party risk management. So I thought maybe it would be a good topic to start this week with. So stay tuned. So as you can see from my screen, I'm using an Excel sheet this week. Anyway, this is my first time of using it. But then I'd like to explain the phases of risk management. So when you're talking about risk management, the full end-to-end phases or process of risk management, it entails 5 different steps, as you can see from my screen. It entails risk identification. That's the first thing. So this Excel I have different information on it, but it's to show you also how a risk register could look. Now, the phases of risk management entail, risk identification. So the first one, as you can see on the screen, number 1 is identify. The second one is risk analysis or assessment, something like that. Assessing the risk or analyzing the risk. The third one is risk treatment. And this is where you are looking for possible solution to this risk. And the fourth one is to monitor. And then the final step is review and update, which usually happen annually in some companies. Sometimes it happens once in 2 years. It depends on what the company itself had defined or what the risk manager had defined. In this case, there are so many risks based on different companies. But in this case, we'll be focusing on cyber risk because we could actually have financial risk. But in our case, because we're dealing with cybersecurity, we'll be focusing on cyber risk. Now, like I said, the number 1 is identify, to identify the risk. The number 2 is assessment. Number 3 is treatment. Number 4 is monitoring. And then number 5 is review/update. Now, there is, this is a simple example of a risk register. We have different columns with the headings, and we have the risk ID, the description, the threat source. I'll be explaining this in a bit. The vulnerability, the impact, the likelihood, the inherent risk score or rating. We have if there are existing controls, would have it in the risk register. And then eventually when a control is applied to inherent risk, it becomes residual risk. Eventually, and sometimes, as you can see from the screen, the inherent risk rating could be at critical. But after you have applied a control to it, then it can reduce to something like medium. And that's why we have control in place. In the risk register, there is also supposed to be a risk owner. Now, I'll explain this in a bit. The treatment plan, I was mentioning that is the third phase in risk management. And we have the status, whether it's open, in progress, closed, planned or whatever, depending on what you decide to call them. And then the review date, the next review date. So all of this column, I'd like to explain it one by one to you. And of course, that this channel is focusing more on beginners. I know people who are well advanced cybersecurity would have an idea or a very good knowledge on how risk management work, maybe side by side the same knowledge that I have, because I don't deal with risk management in my role or past roles. I've never dealt with risk management before. So what is a risk ID? It is just a unique identifier. You can actually decide by yourself how you want to do it. You can make it R1, R2, or R001, like in this case, R002. It's just an identifier that you have decided as a risk manager that, okay, this is how I want to identify different types of risk. In fact, you can have R001A, R001B for risk that are related to each other. So that's what risk ID is. So when you see a risk register and you see a risk ID, you will know that it is decided by maybe the team working on the risk or the risk managers themselves or whatever. It's unique from companies to companies. Whatever risk you're identifying, it doesn't matter. It's not universal. Now, The risk description is just you describing what could go wrong. Like, you already know what a risk is. These threats, vulnerability, and risk sets. It looks like a set diagram where you have the vulnerability, you have the threat. If the threat is able to exploit the weakness, which is vulnerability, then it results into a risk, which is the center part. So the description is what could possibly go wrong, like you can see. And then what is the threat source? You already know what a threat is. A threat could be a who, or it could be a what. It could be a human being, or it could be something else. For example, in this case, it could be an hacker, it could be an insider employee. It could be a misconfiguration, which will fall under the what and not who. Now, what is vulnerability? You already know. Vulnerability is a weakness that has the potential to be exploited. Means vulnerability is something that is just waiting for another thing, a threat, to exploit it. Now, what is impact? Impact is an English word. Impact is just the effect on the business, on the company, on the organization. It could be anything. It goes from financial loss to reputation. It can lead to regulatory bodies coming for your company, not suing, but coming for your company. It could lead to reputational damage. Your customers, vendors can be reaching out to you and saying, we heard about this specific breach and the rest. So that's like the impact. And you could lose customers in this case. It could go as bad as that. It could hurt production. Also, like many cases that you would have read about before. Likelihood is just, say, probability of the risk happening. What is the probability? Does it have like low probability of it happening, or does it have a very high probability that it could happen? Like, the vulnerability can be exploited. What is the probability? That's likelihood. Now, like I said, the inherent risk rating is actually the risk level, risk score, whatever, how you classify it, before controls are applied to it. Now, it could be critical, high, medium, low, whatever. Existing controls are already safeguards that are already in use. So you just apply them to that risk, and then it reduces the risk rating. Then you have something like residual risk. So inherent plus control equals residual risk. That's how it works. So risk owner is the person in charge of managing risk. And I was explaining this to somebody yesterday, and I said risk owner could be, sometimes it could vary. So for example, if I'm dealing with training and awareness, I could be the risk owner when it comes to, okay, we are training A part of the company, we're not training B part of the company, right? But sometimes my manager could be the risk owner, and I'm just like maybe the application owner for the system I use for training. So it depends, it varies. The risk manager is the one who, together with other people or stakeholders, are the ones who decide, okay, this is who we want the risk owners to be, and then all of those requests and everything goes to the risk owner. Now, the treatments are like action you use to manage risk. And I'm sure if you're doing like, simple courses in cybersecurity, Cisco, Security Plus, you'd have seen that treatment could be acceptance, it could be avoidance, it could be transference, and it could be mitigation. So what is acceptance? Acceptance is saying there is a risk, and then it's okay, we would accept it. We don't mind. That's acceptance. It's different from avoidance, and people used to mix it together. So avoiding a risk is saying that the process that will bring about that risk, we don't even want to take part in the process at all. That's avoiding the risk itself. You're avoiding the process so that you don't run into that risk. Now, acceptance is we know that the risk exists, but we don't mind. Maybe the impact is quite low, or the probability of it happening is also quite low. We're like, you know what? We'll just, accept it that way and move on with the process. Now, transference, many of you would have heard about cyber insurance. So it means that a risk that you can transfer to third party or an insurance company. Mitigation is, trying to solve the risk itself, trying to find a solution to it. Now, status is open, in progress, mitigated, if you have solved it, closed, if you've finalized. And then review date is when next you would reassess the risk. So if I assess a risk in January 2024, and we usually set, maybe in my company we have set review for annually. then the next date I will be doing it would be another January 2025, or maybe December 2024, something like that. So I hope that explanation is as simple as possible for every of these column that we have in this risk register. And then we will go through each of these risks, and I hope it will be explanatory to you. Stay tuned. So having described all of the column, now let's go through the column one after the other relating to the risk, and I'll be able to explain it. So risk 001, R001, as you can see on the screen, the risk description is that phishing attack leading to credential theft. We all know what phishing is. Phishing could be via email, via SMS, voice, QR code. Now, the phishing attack is leading to theft of credential, username, password, and the rest. Now, we have on the screen that the source could be external attacker, like somebody from outside of the organization, sending maybe links to people, which is the very common type of phishing attack. It could be multiple. So when I mean multiple, it could be multiple method of phishing. Like they could send you an email, call you, which is phishing, for you to click on the link in the email. So let's concentrate on links and email. Now, the vulnerability is that users may click on malicious link. So this is a weakness that can be exploited actually by an external attacker. I hope you're following. So as we said before, threat is the who and what that has capability of causing a risk. Now, vulnerability is a weakness, right? It's a weakness. So users, like human are the weakest security link. So users may click their weakness that could lead to a risk if an external attacker, send them a malicious link. Now, what would be the impact on the business? It will be high because, they, from the example of this risk register, they classify it as high, which is very reasonable. Because if a malware is downloaded, it could lead to so many things. What is the likelihood that it will happen? It's also very high. With a well-drafted email with malicious link, there's a possibility that one or two users in an organization, if an attacker would send it to 100 users in an organization, there's a high likelihood that at least one or two people would click on it. Now, when you say high to high, now I'll show you a little bit brief calculation in this same document so that you have a better understanding on how impact and likelihood works before we continue down the Excel sheet. Now, there's something we call heat map. Now, what heat map does is that it checks the risk score based off of the impact and the likelihood. Remember, I explained what impact is and what likelihood is. Impact is, the impact on the organization, right? We explained it when I was explaining. So the effect, I wanted to use another word. So the effect on the organization, likelihood is the probability that that risk would happen. Now, let's say, for example, I'm using the example of this Excel sheet. We have defined that our high will be 3, our medium will be 2, and our low will be 1. That's what we have defined. That's the value we have defined, right? Now, for phishing, if we're saying we want to calculate the risk score for phishing, now we'll take the impact multiplied by the likelihood, and it will give us 9. And we would also have defined that 9 would mean critical on the heat map zone. And this is a rough example of how a heat map looks like. This is not a very good picture, but this is what I could get. So, classifying different risks based on where they fall. As you can see, this is where we have, high impact, high likelihood, we have phishing. As you can see, it's in red, right? Now, if we go back and we say, okay, weak password. If somebody is using a weak password, what could be the threat? Let's say it's medium 2. Likelihood that it will be exploited is 3. Which will give us 6, medium. So if we go back here and we see weak password, we can see impact. What is the impact? Medium. What is the likelihood? High. Medium, impact. High. Here, weak password. This is how heat map works. Now, as you can see for the case of lost laptop, the threat is low because most companies usually have this whether auto wipe or something on laptop. So once you report that your laptop is missing, there's likelihood that they would wipe every information out of it, or there's a likelihood that you are not able to sign into your laptop without MFA. In some cases, some people even use biometric. An attacker would not be able to sign in if you use, most likely will not be able to sign in if you use your biometric. So in this case, you can see that, the impact is quite low, the threat is low, the vulnerability is low, so the score would eventually be 2. 1 times 2, which is low. So the likelihood that if you lost your laptop, it will be it's a weakness, but that it will be exploited is also quite low. So because of that, we classify it as a low risk sort of. Now let's go back. I just wanted to explain the impact and likelihood. With this, we are able to get the inherent risk. I was saying initially that the first risk you get, risk score you get, is the inherent one, and we classify it, right? Now, after applying controls to it, you eventually would get a residual risk. That's the final risk. Now, in this case, what are the controls that you can apply? There may be, email filtering system in place, user awareness training. You're teaching users how to spot phishing email. How to spot if somebody is calling them and saying, I'm from IT, I wanted to help you with your login issues. How do they identify that it is actually from the right source or from the company, or it is actually from an attacker? So with a training in place, making sure they get trained and they know how to identify email, maybe with assessment after, making sure there is email filtering system in place to make sure emails like that don't easily pass through and get into your inbox. Then, because of this control, this risk would reduce and return to medium, from critical to medium. Now, who is the risk owner? Like I said, as you can see, it's IT security lead. It's not the awareness trainer. In some cases, it could be that granular to the awareness trainer. But in this case, the IT security lead, you would assume, is the manager of the awareness trainer. As you can see. Now, what is the treatment plan? We can increase training, enable MFA. So even if the risk happened, right, would make sure we are training users to know that this type of thing, they need to really pay attention. And we are making sure that, let's say there is, an attacker is able to access. Without MFA, they cannot really steal, your credentials, blah, 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 or penetrate the system that far. So this will be like the treatment to that risk. Now the status is open because we are coming back to review it once again to make sure that, this type of thing will not happen, or we are rating the risk again, blah, blah, blah. So that's like the full process of, risk management. Like I told you, you are doing the risk identification, which is what we are doing here. You are assessing the risk, which is number 2. So you're assessing it, you're checking what the threats could be, what or who, vulnerability, the impact, the likelihood. You're calculating the score, you're adding controls and checking the residual risk. Then you are moving to risk treatment, and then you're moving to monitoring it and then review eventually. So that's like the full phase. Now if we take the second one, which is ROO2, if we look at ROO2, I might not go through everything, I might get to the third one and stop. Ransomware infection from malicious download is very similar to the first one. External attacker. The vulnerability, the weakness could be that there's no endpoint protection, right? There's no EDR, and then there's weak patching. It could be something that an attacker could exploit. Now, the impact on the organization, if an attacker would exploit that, would be very high, because ransomware, remember what the ransomware is. Your files are encrypted, you're asked for money for the files to be released. Giving them the money does not mean that your files would actually be released, by the way. Likelihood of it happening, okay, maybe it's quite low, medium, right? So medium, high, and medium results in high, right? Because if we say high is 3, medium is 2, 2 and 3, sort of high, right? Now, what are the existing controls? Antivirus and backup. If you have antivirus, there is a high chance that it will prevent it, right? If you have a backup, let's say your files are encrypted, there is likelihood that you'll be able to back up again. And even if it's encrypted, you never get it back, your backup will be there for you to be able to continue business, right? Now, if you add this existing control to the inherent risk, then it becomes medium, right? Now, in this case, is the system admin that is the risk owner. Like I told you, it could be different people based on what the organization think or who the organization think that the risk owners should be. Now, system owner, right? What is the treatment? Improve patching, test recovery, which is very important. That's why it's also good to test this, business continuity, all this disaster recovery plan, business impact assessment, do all those things. That's one of the treatments in case it happens, right? Keep it open, review it again after whatever time you have specified. Again, let's go to the third one. Insider misuse of customer data. Let's say there is somebody in the organization that have access to customer data and they start to, download it or do something with it. That's an insider threat, right? And the threat source is an internal staff because that person is working for the organization. Now, excessive access right. So what is the weakness? It could be that the organization is not giving least privilege to people. It could be. It could, it could be that they still give least privilege access, but, people at the top who have more access are still the ones that are the threat source. It's very possible. But let's say, for example, the organization is not giving least privilege. So lower level staff or people who don't understand the impact of this thing have a lot of rights that they shouldn't. They have access to customer data and they are using it, So what is the impact on organization? There is an exposure of customer data and the customers eventually know that the person who did it is an internal person. There will be a lot of noise around it, even worse than if it is an attacker, right? So the impact on the organization will be very high. Likelihood of it happening is low because as an employee, it has signed contract. You know what it means. If you are caught with customer data doing something malicious with it, you know the impact. You know the impact on your own reputation, future employment, and the rest. You don't want to do that. So the likelihood is low, high, low, medium. Now, existing control is role-based access. By now, I expect that beginners will understand what is role-based access. It means that if you're in HR, you will only get access related to HR stuff, HR application management, whatever. If you're in payroll, you only get access based on payroll. If you're in security, you only get access that is needed for a security person. I don't have to have access to HR system because I'm in security. HR person doesn't have to have access to my phishing platform because they are in HR, they don't need it. So that's role-based access. Audit login. So checking how logins are eventually would also, is also very important so that you see who is logging in, what type of access they have, privileged access users or PAM management, people who have higher access than a normal user. You're auditing their logins. Now, when you have this control, then the inherent risk becomes low. Now, who is the owner in this case? Is data protection officer, the person that deals with GDPR. They are the ones that protect personal data. So that person is the one who is checking, what people have access to make sure that customer data is not misused. Even employee data, that they are not misused. It could fall under this category. Treatment, implement least privilege. Like as I was explaining before, what least privilege is. Implementing least privilege, periodic access review. So you're checking the type of access that people have. And even making sure that there is segregation of duty in some processes, making sure that one employee does not have access to do, 5 different processes that should be split between employees, things like this. So you're reviewing the access, and as you can see, it's in progress. They are not done even for that duration. Let's say we're doing it for January, they are not done, so it's still in progress. They are checking. Once they're finished checking, I think it goes to, they keep it open, then they review it again, but right now it's still in progress. So I hope this explains the whole process of risk management to somebody. Like I said, I don't have the experience with the enterprise level of risk management, but I hope this gives you the basic idea of how risk management works. See you next time.